Project Row Houses is a project that started out reclaiming 22 little shotgun houses in a neighborhood in Houston called the 3rd Ward. There was 22 houses. We started to develop that with the idea of infusing the arts in this process. And since that time, it's grown to include a CDC that has built about 30 units of new constructed housing. We've done a lot of land assembly and have kind of utilized hundreds of artists in our process of growth and development. But and the project now stands at about 5 or 6 blocks now. But let me just kind of talk a little bit about some of the strategies that I've discovered or kind of worked through over the years. Some of the interesting things for me is working both in arts institutions and then community-based institutions. It's always interesting to see how the approach is different. Arts institutions are always concerned first and foremost about the aesthetics. And community institutions, on the other hand, are most interested in the needs. And so there's this kind of dynamic of what comes first. But what's been interesting for me over time, and I've decided that neither of those is the proper starting point for me in the way that I practice what I do. I start based on the idea, on the premise of looking for opportunity, right? And the reason for that is so often, the notion of the weightiness of aesthetic concern up front or need concern up front can also kind of actually stagnate your process and you never really get going. So I always try to go, okay, so what's the opportunity, in this particular situation? Now, opportunity is one of those things that's interesting because it's also very broad. I mean, there's the opportunity of concept, but there's also the opportunity of resources. And so you have to approach this notion of opportunity in a very rigorous manner as far as I'm concerned, which I generally kind of break my approach down into 3 parts. The first one is imagination. I mean, you have to be able to imagine something. You have to be able to, when an opportunity presents itself, you have to be able to imagine what it is. And then the second thing is perception. How do you bring some perception to this opportunity that makes sense? When you bring in perception, you can also start to bridge in this notion of need and aesthetics, because those things kind of get worked out in the process of perception. But one of the more important things, though, about opportunity that I find is listening. Listening is something I think that we take for granted. I mean, we have processes of listening now that we kind of go through the motion. Everybody uses community meetings or charrettes or surveys and those kinds of things. And those are things that are necessary and work. But for me, listening is so important that we can't just stop there. We have to find new ways of listening to hear, because so often you can't get the depth of what people may think and feel in these kind of formalized structures. I always tell people that for me, sometimes, when I'm working in my community in Houston, I do most of my listening at the domino table. I play dominoes all over the neighborhood. In Korea, I found one of the best ways to listen there that people love walking the mountains. So finding someone that you could walk the mountains with was a great way to hear what people really thought. In Florida, one of the best ways for me was having, I managed to get myself in the system of having dinner with people and sitting at the table with them and just having, casual, informal conversation. And, I say that because I think that that's where the real value of understanding comes from. It's the foundation of what a project is, right? It makes a difference between a shared ownership in a project and not. So I just wanted to bring that forth. But the other thing about opportunity is that once you can go through this process and you start looking at need in the context of opportunity, not restricting it to opportunity, but looking at it within the context of opportunity. I was with a young artist and activist in a little Rust Belt town, and has a wonderful, powerful story about her town, and she's very passionate about it. So I went to visit with her, and it was very interesting because what struck me most about her was that everything that came out of her mouth about what was going on there was about the need. There was a need to address the environmental contamination from the mill nearby. There was a need to address the notion of potential political corruption. There was a need to protect the community from exploitation and that kind of stuff. And when I started talking to her about it, and she started to get it after a while though, was that, because she was focusing so much on these needs, it was kind of clouding, the opportunity. And as we start to explore what might be possibilities of opportunities, some of those needs or problems started to roll right into what these opportunities were and potential solutions. And so I think that's a very important thing to think about what opportunity can bear for on needs. And also from aesthetics. Aesthetics is similar. For me, my work is so invested in the creativity and the participation of people from social and institutions that it's impossible for me to think about developing an aesthetic and bringing it to a process where people haven't been engaged in it. And so the notion of allowing yourself to think about opportunity and needs and allow that to frame what the aesthetics might be becomes, to me, another valuable part of investment. Then the final thing of the whole strategy that holds it together and creates a foundation for it is process and collaboration, which kind of is the fruit of all that, that process of listening and developing an understanding of the needs and aesthetics through a process of participation is what kind of gives it its foundation to stand on. So now I'm going to show you just a few images of Project Row Houses and how it came about. Basically, based on that very approach, looking at a neighborhood like the Third Ward, where Project Row Houses exist, it was pretty easy for everybody to scream about the needs. The needs of this community was to deal with this kind of dilapidated housing situation, just bringing the neighborhood completely down. But what about opportunities? Where do you look to find opportunities? It takes some imagination. It's a stretch, right? Those little houses was an opportunity for me as an artist to identify and connect with some other experiences that I've had and to start trying to imagine what relationships you could draw together as an opportunity that would end up eventually addressing needs. And as you can see in this particular slide, it shows basically the process of taking the dilapidated houses into a functional part of the neighborhood. What we ended up with was an opportunity to look at these houses in a way that they hadn't been looked at in a long time, in a way that honored them architecturally, and also some of the other small commercial buildings in the area, but also looking at it within the context of the broader city. You can see that Project Row Houses site is about 1.5 miles from downtown and in the middle of development that's happening from major development activities on a number of different sides. So once we were able to kind of imagine this place, then the question is, so how do you pull that together, and make it something that can be a catalyst for transforming this community? Well, part of that was to put together partnerships with local institutions. So this is a 35-block area that we kind of decided that we could work within because there were institutions that we could build partnerships with, such as schools, hospital, there's a school there, and a number of church institutions. And actually, so the Project Row has this site encompasses all of this property and then scattered sites throughout. But once we were able to kind of work through the development process and seeing how it functioned as a neighborhood, a vibrant neighborhood that was symbolic of how this community could actually exist, and also trying to balance that with what it means to be a private neighborhood as well. That's not just a place for people to come and view it. But one of the really important things about this project, though, has been, to me, of late, it's been not about the stuff that we've done, but the stuff that we've been able to influence. So this is actually a development by a private developer that is not related to Project Row Houses, and there's actually about 3 of these developments that are happening within the neighborhood now. At the same time, though, there are the larger townhouse developments that are happening as well, but we feel like we're having some impact in terms of affecting how people develop. And along the line of listening, education becomes a key component of that. How do we listen with youth, giving them a stake in the project and being able to explore and understand the neighborhood themselves and actually developing it. This is actually a site that was developed by a group of youth. And but then, the whole notion of housing. I mean, in our process of listening, it gave us the opportunity to understand that housing is a major need within this community, but also not just housing, but how do you network people within those housing to give them access to avenues of resources that they wouldn't normally have. Now, the key, though, to this project, though, has been the relationship to the arts and how we've used the arts, or the arts have been an integral part in our listening process. So I basically gave you a few examples of how I go about listening, but this entire project, every 6 months we have a new group of artists that come in, at least 7 or 8 at a time, that gives us opportunities for listening. Setu Joan has participated in our project. This is an artist from Dallas that did a Third Ward archive where he photographed people from the neighborhood. This is a New Orleans project, a project that happened after Katrina, in which an artist did this ritual where people could come together and talk about issues that were going on. I just threw this in for shock value, but this is an artist that did a project after Hurricane Ike, utilizing some of the brutal things that were happening in the neighborhood after the hurricane. This is a project that looked at gardening, in which it started what's called the Greenhouse Collaborative now, but they started out by growing things within the house and then transplanting them to the outside of the house so that people in the neighborhood could actually move them for their own purpose. And I'm going to end with what we call the Field Guide, and that is the project that we're constantly looking at and evaluating, how do we define, with the support of people in our neighborhood, the identity of the neighborhood. And the little guide is homage to Mark Dion's project, which creates kind of like a little passport for the neighborhood. And that's Project Row Houses. Thank you.